Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to be recommending some books that I don't want to say are underrated, but they're all books that I really enjoyed but that I haven't really seen spoken about much on BookTube or Bookstagram or anywhere else online. When I was putting this list together, I basically went onto my Goodreads and I picked out books that I've read in the last couple of years and that I gave 3 or 4 stars or above to, but that have less than around 5,000 or 6,000 ratings, because I thought that would be a really good indication of how many people have read these books. Before I forget, I did just want to mention that some of these books I did receive through Netgalley, and obviously that never affects my overall review, but I just like to be transparent, and so I will leave a list down in the description just in case you wanted to check it out, and I'll also have timestamps just in case you did want to skip ahead at any point. There's a mix of genres, so I have a few thrillers, a few contemporary, and then one that's like a historical mystery. Okay, so the first book I'm going to talk about is The Nothing Man by Catherine Ryan Howard, and this is about a security guard called Jim who works in a supermarket, and one day he sees this book being advertised called The Nothing Man, and it's basically a true crime memoir by this woman called Eve Black. And when she was a kid, her family were victims of this serial killer called the Nothing Man, and she was the only survivor. And as Jim starts reading, he starts to get more and more angry because he was or is the Nothing Man and he's never been caught. But as he's reading this book, he realises that Eve might be close to working out who he really is. What I really liked about this book is that it's basically a book within a book. So you have chapters from Jim's point of view, but then you also have chapters that are taken from Eve's book. And I really like that. I really like books that are set within books or books within books. And so if you like the idea of a fiction book that feels like a true crime novel, then I'd really recommend this. I think it's quite short as well. I'm pretty sure that it's less than 300 pages and I read it in a day because I thought the author did a really good job of building the tension and the suspense, and I couldn't put it down. The next book on my list is The Heatwave by Katerina, and this is a little confusing because there were 2 books that came out around the same time that were both called The Heatwave, and the authors have similar names, but I'll put a picture of the front cover on the screen so you know which one I'm talking about. So this follows a woman who one day is watching the news when this story comes on about a girl in a seaside town who's gone missing, and straight away she recognises the name of the town because it's the town that she grew up in, and where when she was a teenager another teenage girl went missing, and she suspects that the 2 might be linked, but back then she ran away from home and didn't really confront what happened. She knew a lot more than she let on, and so the book is about her going back to her hometown and finally confronting what happened back then. This book is a weird one because when I first started it, I was enjoying it and I liked the writing. It was okay, but it felt kind of average and like any other thriller. But then the further that it got towards the end, obviously I don't want to go into spoilers, but it definitely picked up, like the pacing got a lot quicker, and I found that actually the ending was just not what I was expecting at all. It reminded me a little bit of Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn in the sense that it's about a woman going back to her hometown to confront her past, and so I think if you like books that are like that and that feature that trope, then I'd really recommend this one. Next on my list is Watch Her Fall by Erin Kelly, which is a book that I read quite recently, so I might be cheating a little bit with this one because I feel like that's the reason why it hasn't got that many ratings yet, because it literally came out at the start of April. But I really enjoyed it, and so I wanted to mention it because I think it's one of my favourite thrillers that I've ever read. I gave it 5 stars, which I don't give thrillers 5 stars that often. It takes a lot to surprise me and grip me with a thriller, but this one was really good. This is a very dark and atmospheric thriller about a ballet company that are about to put on this performance of Swan Lake, and the daughter of the director has been given the lead role, which is a role that most dancers would absolutely kill for. And at the start of the book there's this really great sense of unease because Ava is starting to feel like someone might be out to get her and is looking to trip her up and see her fail. I don't want to say much more than that, but this book took me completely by surprise. There was a bit in the middle where I was really confused what was going on because the book seemed to pivot in a completely random direction, but it's one of those where you really have to stick with it because eventually the different threads do start to come together And when they started to come together, I was really, really shook. I thought, wow, okay, this is clever. I see where this is going and I like it. I don't know anything about ballet, and so I don't know how accurate it is, but I did feel like I was fully immersed in this world, and there was this great sense of tension throughout the book that I thought was done really well. And like I said, I gave it 5 stars. I'd really recommend it. The next book on my list is People of Abandoned Character by Clare Whitfield, and this is a historical mystery that's set in London in the late 1800s. It follows a woman called Susanna who moves to London to become a nurse, and she ends up meeting and marrying this very wealthy surgeon, and their relationship is a bit of a whirlwind, but things seem to be going great at first until immediately after their honeymoon he changes and he starts to become very violent towards her. And around the same time, the newspapers start to report on a series of murders that are happening in Whitechapel, and Susanna begins to suspect that her husband may be this man they're calling Jack the Ripper. I was actually really surprised by how much I enjoyed this book, considering it's not my usual genre, but I thought the atmosphere was done really well, and I felt like I'd been transported to London during that time. If you don't read a lot of historical fiction, but you like the idea of a mystery that's set within a historical setting, then I would recommend this. The only thing I will say is that this book does have content warnings for domestic abuse, miscarriage, murder and surgical trauma. There are some quite graphic descriptions, and so just something to bear in mind if you are thinking of reading this. I did read an arc of this through Netgalley, but I have noticed that it's actually available on Kindle Unlimited. So Kindle Unlimited, I always feel like I can't say that word, but yeah, it's available on Kindle Unlimited if you do have a subscription. Okay, so next I'm going to move on to the contemporaries, starting with The Shelf by Helly Acton, and this is about a woman called Amy who's been with her boyfriend for a couple of years, and he surprises her with what she thinks is going to be an incredible holiday, and she thinks that he might be about to propose, but instead she finds herself on this reality TV show called The Shelf, where these men have basically entered their wives and girlfriends to live in this Big Brother style house. They get dumped live on air, and then they have to take part in these challenges that are meant to teach them how to be the perfect wife or girlfriend, and the winner is crowned the keeper and they take home £1 million. In some ways this book wasn't what I was expecting, because I thought it was going to be very light-hearted, and it is funny in places, but it's more of a cringe funny, and it's more of the kind of book that really makes you think. The main theme in this book is all around self-love and acceptance, and I really loved the bond between the women that are taking part in this TV show. All of the women have very different stories, and I found that certain parts were very, very relatable. What I will say is that the men in this book were awful. There was so much misogyny, and it made me really, really angry, but I also feel like that was the point of the book. Like, it's meant to provoke a reaction, and I think it would be a really interesting book to read with friends or as part of a book club, because there's a lot you could talk about. If you like contemporary fiction that has feminist themes, then I would recommend giving this a go. I didn't love it. I gave it like a 3.5 stars, like a 7 out of 10, but I think other people could really, really enjoy this, and like I said, it was definitely interesting and very thought-provoking. Next on my list is The Sight of You by Holly Miller, and this is, I don't know whether it's a contemporary romance. I think I would say that it's a contemporary romance, but it follows a guy called Joel who has these visions about the people that he loves. Whenever he dreams, he sometimes sees the future of what's going to happen to the people close to him, and sometimes they're good visions and sometimes they're not good visions. And so because of this, he always avoids forming new relationships, because as soon as he falls for someone, he starts to dream about them, and that can cause problems. But then he meets a woman called Callie who is trying to find her way in life after the death of her friend, and so it's about their relationship. And I don't want to say too much more, because this is one of those books that it's best going in not knowing too much. This was an emotional roller coaster. Like, it's one of those books that I can still remember quite clearly how it made me feel as I was reading it. It kind of reminded me a little bit of The Time Traveller's Wife, but less creepy. So yeah, would recommend this if you like emotional contemporary romances. Next on my list is The Love Square by Laura Jane Williams, and this is about a woman called Penny who starts a relationship with a guy that's not really a relationship. They start seeing each other and then circumstances pull them apart. And so she ends up meeting another guy that she's attracted to, and then she meets another guy that she's attracted to, and it's about her trying to work out what she wants. I feel like you need to take my opinion on this book with a pinch of salt, because this has very, very low ratings on Goodreads, and I can kind of see why, because it's marketed as a romance, and I don't think it is a romance. I mean, it is, but I didn't care about any of the romances. Like, I didn't care who Penny ended up with. I cared more about her and her journey. Penny as a character is a really interesting one, because I definitely felt like she was flawed, but she also felt very real and relatable. And I don't know whether it's because she's a similar age to me and she also went through cancer in her 20s, and that is actually a big motivator for her actions. And so I could see a lot of myself in her. But yeah, a lot of people didn't seem to like this book in comparison to Laura Jane Williams's other book, but I actually preferred the writing a lot more in this book. I liked Our Stop when I read it a couple of years ago, but I did feel like the writing was a bit clunky in places, and I could definitely see that it had improved with this book. It was a lot more put together, and I have actually got an arc of the author's next book, which comes out this summer, and I'm really looking forward to reading that too. Next on my list is Olive by Emma Gannon, and this follows a woman called Olive, surprisingly, who has been friends with her three best friends for a really long time, and they've always been really close. They actually went to uni together and lived together throughout uni, but now that they're in their 30s, Olive is starting to feel like their lives are going in very different directions, because one of her friends is married with kids, another of her friends is pregnant and about to have her first child, and then another of her friends is having IVF to try and get pregnant. But Olive is pretty certain that she never wants to have children. What I really liked about this book is how the friendship group felt very realistic, and I think that if you're in your late 20s or early 30s and you've ever been in a situation where you felt like your life is going in a very different direction to how your friends' lives are going, then I think you'll find this very relatable, because I definitely did. I also really liked the writing style for this and how it felt very warm and gentle and honest, and I liked that the topic of wanting to remain child-free was handled in a very sensitive way, and it was one of my favourite books that I read last year, and I gave it 5 stars. Next on my list is 1 Minute Later by Susan Lewis, and this follows a woman called Vivian who pretty much has the perfect life. She has a successful job, she lives in this beautiful apartment in the city, and she has a great group of friends. However, in the very first chapter, she's out celebrating her 27th birthday when she has a heart attack and finds that she has this heart condition that she's never known anything about, and she finds out that she needs to have a heart transplant, and her life changes forever. She has to move back home while she's waiting for a donor heart to become available, and it's very hard to talk about this book without spoilers, but you also have another perspective of a woman called Helly, and that timeline is set in the 1980s, where Helly and her family move into this farm. And I'm not going to say much more on this, because as I was reading this, I had this feeling that the two storylines were gonna collide at some point, and I'm not going to say if they do or they don't, but I did think that the way the stories came together was very clever. One of the things that stood out to me about this book was how helpless Vivian feels about her situation that she's been put in, and I could relate to that so much, because I've been there and I know exactly what it's like. I also really liked how this book raised awareness of organ donation and how important it is, and if you're looking for a book that is the definition of emotional roller coaster, then I'd really recommend this one. The final book on my list is Has Anyone Seen My Sex Life by Kristen Bailey, and I'm going to just be honest, this is not my usual book. This is not the kind of book that I would usually reach for, but I thought the title was funny and it was 99p on Kindle, and I was in the mood for something that was a little bit light-hearted and funny. I think I was going through a bit of a reading slump at the time, and I like to read outside my comfort zone sometimes. I like to read books that are told from a perspective that I'm not used to. So this follows a woman who has been married for a while, and her and her husband have fallen into a bit of a rut, and she learns that her husband has a secret. She finds something in their house that she wasn't expecting, and I'm not going to say much more on this because this book really surprised me. I don't want to say why because I know that's being really cryptic, but I feel like that could be spoilers. But considering that I am not the target audience for this book, I thought it was genuinely funny, and it really surprised me. It's the kind of book that I'd recommend if you're looking for something to read on the beach and that isn't gonna take too much effort to focus on, but that is going to genuinely make you laugh out loud. The best way I can think to describe this book is that it was exactly what I was expecting from the cover and from the title, but it also wasn't. So yeah, if you're looking for a book that's like this, then I would recommend it. I think that if you're married and you have kids, then you'd probably relate to it a lot more than I did. But I gave this book 4 stars, and I read it over a year ago, but I can still remember what happened reasonably well. But yeah, that does bring me to the end of the video. So thanks for watching if you've made it this far. If you've read any of the books that I've mentioned on this list, then please let me know in the comments what you thought of them, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and click subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Bye.